Welcome to a brand new week of Art with Mr. Z. You've made your grid in preparation to prepare a gridded drawing, and now you are ready to choose your reference image. I've chosen a nice picture of bassist and vocalist extraordinaire Esperanza Spalding. I'm especially fond of Esperanza because I used to play bass a long time ago and still like to think that I can, although I probably cannot. You may choose also a nice picture of Chinese artist and dissident Ai Weiwei, Japanese animation master Hayao Miyazaki, a wonderful Honda motorcycle, Ohioan basketball extraordinaire LeBron James, Chinese-American designer Maya Lin, or this very fetching tiger. The way we're going to start is we're going to look at our grid and our gridded image, and we're going to see what we can notice about how this works. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be copying each square by square so that everything is consistent. And we're going to do it slowly. It's going to take us a long time, and this is going to be a difficult project. As we work, I want you to notice something. I've zoomed in on the square around Esperanza's eye. And when I get to this square as I'm copying it, I want you to notice that even the white of her eyeball is not white, because you can always compare it to the white of the paper. That is white. This, therefore, will have some amount of shading on it. So that's something I want you to be very careful for as you're working. Now there's a few ways that you can approach a gridded drawing. You can do the whole thing one square at a time so that you're just simply copying a square without any mind to what's going on elsewhere in the composition. Or you can kind of give yourself a line map and then do the shading kind of more intuitively. I recommend the first one because that's going to create a lot more accuracy, and it's really going to get you more in touch with the act of close observation, which is what a gridded drawing is all about. Basically, the idea is that you're training your eye to see spatial relationships because you're always noticing what is directly across and what is directly up and down from a given point. And you're training your eye to focus on minute details and to basically do the same process of observation and copying, but you're doing it one grid square at a time. I'm going to get us started here. Normally, you could start from anywhere you want. I usually recommend that you start from a corner and work your way in some kind of methodical fashion. But for the sake of illustrating what we're doing, I'm going to start in her face just because there's a wider variety of values there that we can explore, and that's useful for this demonstration. So I'm actually going to start 2 grid squares over from the left and 4 grid squares down from the top. You always want to measure carefully to make sure that you are in the correct grid square when you're working, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to waste a lot of time and you're going to discover an inaccuracy that you cannot correct. Just to kind of show you how this goes, I've done a little bit of this drawing just starting from these 2 grid squares. Hopefully you can see how I express the entire range of values. So kind of working from where I started. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down into this square here so that you can really see how I captured everything from like the darkest color that I'm seeing here into much lighter colors and everything in between. So let's start with that kind of light line drawing just to give myself an idea of where everything is happening in the grid. Now if I look at the contrast between light and dark here, I can see that there's a line running more or less along the edge of her profile, that is the side of her face, and it's going from about halfway where it connects with the top down to about almost the bottom right corner, but if you look very carefully, you can see that in fact it intersects above that bottom point. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that area, and I want to really follow the shape of this line. Almost kind of just see how it relates to the edges of that square. And by breaking everything up into squares like this, you can really easily start to put together a convincing likeness. meaning that you're going to be creating a very accurate drawing. And just look how the shape of that edge of the eye barely tells you anything. You're going to want to go ahead and draw eyes the way that you think that eyes look, but I want you to resist that temptation. And I will be, again, linking you to videos that show you how to draw eyes and noses and mouths and things like that. I want you to trust what you're seeing and not rely on what you think those things look like. So now I've drawn a kind of a light line outline of what I expect to be seeing in this square. Notice that I didn't draw the whole eyeball because most of this eyeball is actually in this square next to it. And I haven't gotten there yet. I want to take it one square at a time. I know that this is the darkest thing that I'm seeing, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with dark pencil. Just like that. And if I do it well, if I do a good job of hatching, my pencil strokes aren't going to show up, and it's going to look consistent with the box next to it. And I want to make sure that I'm being very gentle as I approach the edges. I don't want to have a lot of hard lines in this. Now, I can also kind of see that there's some variation going on here in the quality of that edge. And I want to be sensitive to it. Sensitivity is going to make a big difference in this drawing if you can really show that you're observing every form very closely. And I'm starting with the dark, so I'm going to work my way lighter and lighter as I go. And you're going to find that you might bounce around quite a little bit between light and dark. So now I need to match this kind of level of darkness next to it. So I've started off and given myself something to kind of aim at. Remember that the whites of the eye are never really white. If I hold my paper next to this, you can really see that that is actually quite dark compared to the white of the paper. There we go. So it starts to emerge. Now remember what I said earlier about how this is not white and this even is not white. So I want to make sure that I'm getting a little bit of value in that eyeball. Just like that. And then from there I know that I need to go pretty much darker everywhere else. And this is a step that you might do later on as you darken things up. Remember, if you go darker, it's always going to look better than if you go too light. So here we go. Here comes the first kind of layer of value that I want to achieve just in order to match the values that I'm seeing here. Using a very consistent level of pressure. There we go. And now I can keep going and kind of do the next square over. So this would be very dark here. I can see that gradual transition again. In nature, there are actually very few hard edges. And the painter John Singer Sargent used to go around and he used to smudge the edges of forms that his students would be painting because he insisted that that was more expressive. And if you look at his work, you can see that he mostly did the same thing for himself, although there's a few inconsistencies. but he was one of the great American masters, and you can really see that that sensitivity to the edge is what sets him apart from many other painters of the time. So now I've got these two squares. You're going to notice that in a lot of the reference images that we're looking at, there's many squares that you're just going to be filling up with black, dark marks, as dark as you can. But there's almost never going to be a square that you can just leave alone and leave white. For example, if we look up here in the upper left-hand corner, you're going to notice that the white of the paper is slightly whiter than the white of the background here. And as we move to the right, that becomes even more obvious, right? So you can always compare to the white of the paper if you're not sure whether you've gone dark enough or light enough. The white of the paper should indicate to you what white is. And the darkest value that you see in your reference image, that's you pressing as hard as you can with your pencil. But you're going to want to kind of look for, especially when you get to values that are kind of in between light and dark. So let's see if we can find an area that's like that. Let's look at, we're going to go over here, and I want to look at this. This is an area of background that I expect you to pay attention to. Background, you're not just going to leave it blank, you're actually going to do some work there as well. So this is along the right edge, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares down. So always remember to count very carefully. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I just want to match that value. I see that it kind of changes right here and it's going at an angle like that. So probably it's going to be easier for me to hatch this way from side to side. So I want to start again very light at the top because I know that that isn't white, but it's also not like a very dark color. And if I go too dark, I can erase it. You want to erase very carefully because you don't want to lose your grid line. So what I'm doing is I'm just sort of gently tapping, almost like petting gently with my eraser. And what you don't want to do is smudge with your finger because then you will completely lose the level of value and the sensitivity that you were trying to achieve before. So that's something that would be sort of in the middle right there. I need to make a smoother transition into the light. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that we can kind of compare the values. Like, how close am I getting here? How close am I getting on this side between these two? What you want to do is really go as accurate as you can. Always be looking and comparing, and like you can back out and kind of look at it from a distance to see how accurate your values are. And that's a really good way to measure the accuracy of what you're doing. So I wish you good luck, and I'm going to be sort of working on this in the background, and I'll post an update later so that you can see what my version looks like.